Hello again. Welcome to another episode of Leading from Alignment with our good friend, John Opalewski. How are you today, John?
Jim, I'm doing great. I'll tell you, the 10, 15 minutes that we spent talking before the recording today, just so good for me. And just love catching up and chatting with you.
It's just good to have friends. Always good to have friends. Right on. So today is episode number 96. And I think people are going to really, I think when they hear what the topic is or they read what the topic was, they clicked on it because we need information here. We need clarity. We need direction. The metrics of the church are changing so rapidly. And why don't you introduce our topic for the day?
Sure. The subject is how digital is impacting the local church.
Yeah.
And, you know, the thought came to me, is digital our friend or is it our foe? You know, we talk with a lot of pastors, both you and I, and there is a vast range of opinions, right, about this subject versus, you know, digital versus in-person gatherings. And you know, our observations have been that some leaders have fully bought into digital.
Yeah.
Others have rejected it outright.
Yeah.
And while most pastors find themselves somewhere in the middle, right, of those two extremes. Right. And Jim, I was curious, as a lead pastor, where is your church landed?
Yeah, we decided about a year ago, you know, we put our eggs in this basket or that basket. We decided to put all of our eggs in both baskets. We decided that, you know, people used to invite everybody to church. Now a lot of relationships online. So a simple like of a service or a sermon reaches 1,000 people. And the thing about waves is that you can try to fight a wave and it generally kills you. You can try to surf a wave and it's generally enjoyable. Yeah. So we believe that culture is not our master, that Jesus is, and that culture leaning in this direction, we just decided to get in front of it and not let it pass us. We got to wait for the next wave. Let's get on top of it. Let's paddle really hard, put all of our effort, and once we stand up, hope we don't die. And it's as exciting as surfing in a lot of ways. So we put all of our eggs in both baskets. We have a full online studio. We have staff positions for online and technical support. We have online pastors, if you will. They're not paid, but they're moderators of a conversation that happened in the background. And it has been horrible. It has been wonderful. It's been expensive. It's been the best investment we ever made. Ask me on any given day, and I'll tell you what a terrible or wonderful idea. It's been. I think I'm leaning now towards wonderful. I think this whole last pandemic, having had 3 years experience in online broadcasting, prior to that, really helped us help a lot of people. I'm glad we got on the wave early.
Yeah. So what I'd like to do today is really look at two questions. How is digital helping? Yeah. And how might it be hurting? That's what I'd like us to discuss. So let's start with how it is helping.
Yeah.
And the first way I think it's helping is that it's actually expanding the front door of the church that you lead. Now, I know for many years prior to the pandemic that unchurched people were checking out churches online for a while before they would walk through the physical doors of that building. That has never been truer than it is today.
Yeah.
You know, pastors have relayed stories to us regarding newcomers who were watching online for 6 months.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Before stepping foot inside of their building. And so I think one way that the pandemic has forced us into digital, it's really been a blessing because it has expanded that front door to our church.
Yeah, absolutely agree. We have people all over the United States that are now a part of, if you will, depending on how you measure that, a part of our church. Mm-hmm. They are as regular in attendance as people that live in the same zip code. They are as regular in giving. They're as regular in sharing the service, the gospel, you know, as they would if they were in 48430. Right. They do from New York. They do from Florida. They do from, that was that country just north of Michigan called the Upper Peninsula. You know, they would have people way where the ice caps never melt, you know, and they would not have been if we were just a Yellow Pages ad like we were 25 years ago.
Yeah. So that's one way I see it helping. Here's another way I think it helps is that digital offers continuity.
Yes.
You know, it allows those who are ill or even on vacation to still be a part of the community at some level. For example, Laura and I went to Tennessee in May for 10 days of vacation, 10 wonderful, glorious, amazing days. But we still tuned in digitally to our church service. And it afforded us this sense of continuity in terms of we were in the middle of a sermon series. And so it allowed us to stay in the continuity of that. There was communication going on, very important communication at our church at the time. Our lead pastor is transitioning or has transitioned to a new role as superintendent of the Assemblies of God in the state of Michigan here. And so that allowed us continuity with that important communication. So I see that as a plus.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think you're saying the number one place we lost people is when they had their first child, because the thought of handing that baby over to a stranger in the nursery, just the umbilical cord wouldn't stretch that far. It had been cut, but it was still there. And one of the things we noticed is that they stay connected for the month or 2 or 3 or 4, where they're comfortable enough now, they got enough sleep, they have a rhythm, a pattern, they're ready to hand the kid to a stranger. They're still a part of our church. They didn't drop out of the church and then come back when the kids were teenagers and wild. They stayed in the church because of that regular. It's not the best connection, but it's so much better than no connection to your church.
Right. Yeah. Here's the third way I think it helps is it creates opportunity or room for brief touches during the week. Instead of connecting with our people only once on the weekends, and for many people it's once every other weekend. From a physical perspective, digital allows for short touches throughout the week. And I noticed that, I observed that right away when the pandemic hit, just watching the midweek touches via video and how impactful those were for me personally. And I think that's one of the neat things that digital has allowed us. It gives us these short, brief little touch points to encourage each other, to challenge one another. And I think that is a beauty of this that's maybe underappreciated. It's like I said, it's a wave, right? It's moving you faster than you can swim, or it just buried you on the reef. And that's why. Again, you don't have to have this, right? Jesus didn't have this, Paul didn't have this, Peter didn't have this. It's a new technology, but if we make it our servant, it can serve us well. But I understand the concerns too, right? That they're not as many people in the church, in the building as we used to. It feels like we're losing the fight, or that they're not as connected as they used to be. They're more involved in their little league or their cabin up north or their bowling, whatever. And I think we do need a new set of metrics to measure success and failure. We talked about the pyramid, right? We used to measure the height of the pyramid. How many people attend? Well, that's our success or failure. I think we're going to have to change that to start measuring the base of the pyramid. How many people are involved? This is ministry 2. This is ministry 4. How many do we have ministry 4? And for those of you that are listening and not watching, I made a triangle with my fingers, and my thumbs are the base of the triangle. My pointer fingers are the top of the triangle. We measure where my pointer fingers meet the attendance, but we fail to measure sometimes what makes a church healthy, what makes a church strong, what makes a church grow. So if the base of our pyramid, we have ministry for 1,000 people, we'll soon have 1,000 people. If we have 2,000 people a day, we'll shrink to that 1,000 people. If we have 500 people a day, we'll grow to that 1,000 people. But I think it allows us to measure, maybe it was probably the right metrics all along, which was people engagement, giving, serving, small group attendance. These are the things that we overvalued one measurement that didn't mean what we thought it meant. Right. COVID took that all away from us. And I think online really helps us to stay engaged with that crowd, but also helps us build the core. Yeah. And so digital, fourthly, I think it helps us, it just reinforces the truth, Jim, that church isn't a building, that it's people. And I have heard that statement from almost the first day I gave my life to Jesus. Yeah, sure. But our behavior, when you look at our collective behavior as the church, Big C, it suggests that we don't believe that, right? Yeah, right. And so we have been building centric in so many ways, and we've expected people to come to us to be fed spiritually. And I think digital is forcing us out of that entrenched pattern and helping the church to get where people are instead of only getting people to where we are or the church is, if that makes sense. So that is a fourth benefit. Let me give you one more quick one, and then we'll jump into the some of the negatives of it. Digital gives people options.
Yeah,
I think that's a good thing. The people that you lead like options.
Yeah.
How do I know this is true? Well, I go to McDonald's and they want to supersize. They want to know if I want to supersize stuff, right?
Yeah.
Small, medium, large options. Now, when I was growing up, you didn't have that option at McDonald's, right? You just got what you got. But fast food chains have figured out decades ago that people love options. And, when you're on vacation or you're under the weather, it's nice to have that option to tune into the message and the worship experience and stay up to date with what's happening in the church. So I think those are the five, Jim.
Yeah.
Just briefly, give me a summary of what you think of those five positives.
I think a shift in our mindset from there's the ministry of church. We have church. And then there's the ministry of the church. Is a good distinction. I think the digital may not be the best thing for the ministry of church because we don't get the oxytocin rush of seeing each other and hugging and high-fiving and the conversations live far away. And a lot of stuff that changes our life isn't during the sermon. It's the relationships we build before and after it, right? People change our lives, not just the information we share. So, but the ministry of your church is best presented or easily presented through these online. You're already doing it. Put a camera up or two, put some lights up, get somebody to hit a couple of buttons to switch between cameras so it's interesting. It's not overly expensive. It's not overly difficult to figure these things out in basic ways. They've made it simple enough that you can control the whole thing from your phone now. If everything's set in the right place, you're really not. I mean, music can be difficult, mixing the music live but the message itself, the gospel going out, the ministry of your church to expand it into this online world where anybody in the world at any time with internet connection for the foreseeable future can access what God did on that day, and God can do it in this new day that the person listens to it 10 years from now. It's powerful. And I guess just to really sum it up as quickly as I can, there was probably a day when someone said, I'm going to write this down. And somebody said, well, no, this is an oral tradition. We don't write down this is the truth as expressed through our mouths. And then someone took that and said, well, it has to stay in this language. And somebody said, no, we should translate it into another language. I measured another group of people that said, well, no, I learned it in Hebrew. I learned it in Greek. I learned it in Latin. It can't be in a new language. And somebody said, let's put it on the radio. And somebody said, well, no, the Holy Spirit is an in-person person. He's not a virtual person. The radio won't work. And printing presses won't work, and TV won't work. And we know that God uses all things that are submitted to him. So I would look at this whole internet thing as it's God is going to use it if we put it in his hands. If we say God doesn't use online, we're really missing an opportunity.
Yeah. So let's talk for a few minutes about how the digital church might be hurting.
Yes, because I'm an old guy. I don't like change. I'm excited about this part.
Okay. So the first one is reduced accountability.
Yeah.
It is much easier to hide behind a screen.
Yes.
To play church. And while physical attendance doesn't guarantee accountability, it really makes it easier. So I think that's one of the problems is that there's less accountability, and that concerns me. Yes. Here's another one. Digital doesn't replace our need for human touch.
Yeah.
You've already alluded to that a little bit, right? Loneliness is at epidemic portions in our country. Before the pandemic, it was identified as one of the main contributors to depression and anxiety in our country. And the pandemic has just exacerbated it. Right.
Mandatory. Yeah.
Right. And it's a key driver. Loneliness is a key driver of anxiety and depression.
Yeah.
The digital experience by itself is not addressing our need for human touch.
Right.
For human interaction.
Yes.
Genesis 2:18, God said about Adam, it is not good for the man to be alone. Right. And so that part of digital might be hurting us a little bit because it's not the same You know, it's like you said, it's not the conversations prior to in the lobby and after in the lobby. And it's not, hey, let's go out for lunch afterwards and spend some time catching up, things like that. So I see that as one way digital might be hurting people. Because let's be honest, there are people who have decided I'm only doing digital for the rest of my life.
Yeah.
I get it, but I'm concerned about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, there were people prior to this decided to home church, which probably meant, and not always, but often meant, I got hurt in enough churches that I don't trust the church, period.
Yeah.
We'll just stay at home and read the Bible. But 90% of them, and I made that statistic up on the spot, just like Yogi Berra, but a vast majority of them, home church meant we don't do church at all anymore, and God kind of fades from the picture. And they didn't gather the children and pray and have worship, and they just neglected it because they were afraid, or they'd had bad experiences, and the cognitive dissonance of experience. You never reach some sort of continuity of narrative of we're people and God's God, So there's I agree completely. I think they are missing out on something. But I guess I could understand sometimes why that's not a bad thing for a season.
Yes.
But long term, iron sharpens iron, not by looking at it on a screen. There's contact, there's friction. You can teach me everything there is to know about love, but I don't know anything about love until you offend me and I have to forgive you. Until you don't return a phone call and I have to translate what that means in real time. Teach me everything about forgiveness, but until I forgive, I don't know anything about forgiveness. That's human relationship. You can get smart, but you can't get wise. Yeah. You can get healed, but you'll never become whole. Not without people. It's part of it.
Yeah. So here's the third way I think it could be hurting the church is that we're missing out on the impact of the corporate experience. Yeah. And this specifically, I'm thinking about worship, the worship component, right, of the singing and the glorifying of God. Yeah. I think that you can do that online and it's all right, but worshiping in person with a group of like-minded believers is almost always better.
Yeah, almost always, yeah.
That the physical gathering dynamic cannot be duplicated digitally.
Yeah.
It just cannot. Now, we've experienced that, Jim, when we teach, right? So in the last year and a half, we've done a lot of teaching online.
Right.
You and I both, to crowds of pastors. And that's good and it's effective and it's useful. But there's something special about being in the same room and being able to read what's going on in that room and sense what's going on in that room and adjust along the way. It is very hard. I've had a Zoom call with 35, 40 leaders on it.
Wow.
I have no way of reading that room.
No.
When I'm there, when I'm communicating, when I'm gathered in the same physical space with those guys and gals.
Yeah.
It's much easier for me to sense what is actually going on in the moment. So I don't believe digital can duplicate that dynamic of in-person.
No, not at all. Not at all.
And then let me give you the last one because we need to wrap up. We're getting to our time here. Is I think digital by itself can stunt discipleship.
Yes.
I think it can happen digitally, but it's harder to do because here's what I think goes on. You can actually relay good information and teach and help people to understand things. But what you can't do digitally is invite somebody into your life.
Right. Yeah.
Hey, when I was being discipled right away after I gave my life to Jesus, part of the discipling was shooting hoops with my spiritual mentor, going out to dinner, watching this guy interact with real life as a Christian and just watching him was an important piece of my discipleship journey. What do you think about that last one, Jim?
I think that's why Jesus said, follow me and not read my book.
Yeah.
It doesn't demean the word of God, but it was already written, but the word had to become flesh because something else happened when the word became flesh. There was another dynamic that was missing. And that was seeing, what new covenant kingdom come will be done on earth living look like. And I think we've had that, right? I think we live up to kind of the expectations of our predecessors that discipled us or mentored us. So we don't often go far beyond those expectations. We don't go beyond our education or our experience. So having a discipling element, I can read the Proverbs and tell me what a fool is and what a wise man is, but it's different if you tell me I'm behaving foolishly. There's a relationship that puts a certain authority or impact behind those words.
Right.
That if it's a guy that died a long time ago, well, in eternity I'll ask Solomon what he meant. But if John says, are you patterning your life after Christ? And let me point out this one thing that I'm concerned about in your life as a friend. Right. That scriptural impact is much higher than a biblical truth that I read in the privacy of my prayer closet that I glanced over and kept going.
That's right.
Yeah.
So I think this combination, this combo of digital and physical is going to be with us for the foreseeable future. I don't think it's going away anytime soon.
Absolutely.
And it remains to be seen how digital helps the local church and maybe hurts the local church in the long run. And so one of the challenges I think we want to leave with those who are listening or watching today is this: what are you going to do with digital? Are you going to ignore it? Are you going to criticize it? Are you going to go whole hog with it? And you're going to have to answer that for your own context. We really can't answer that for you.
Right.
But I want to encourage you, Jim wants to encourage you today to pour gasoline on how digital helps.
Yeah.
While being aware and addressing how it hurts. I think we can leverage the good parts of digital and combine them with the good parts of in person. And you know what? This makes leading more complex.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes we just react to that, right, Jim? We don't make this any harder than it already is.
Right. Now I have to be a TV producer on top of being everything else. Yeah.
But whoever said leading was easy, it's not.
It's not.
And if somebody told you leading was easy, they were lying to you.
Yeah, they were selling you something.
So that's what I got today, Jim.
Seth Godin said something the other day I thought was really interesting. He said, it isn't that people don't like change. It's that they don't like being pushed to a place of incompetence. So, but I have to have this new discipline to be a good pastor, but I know nothing of it. It's not that I don't like change. If somebody showed up and said, I'm just going to take the video while you're preaching, we're going to edit the music while it comes out, we're going to expand the ministry of this church to go global through this internet, you'd be excited about it. So it isn't that change is the problem. Is that change is pushing many of us to a place of incompetence. And that's where we're just not comfortable with it. I don't know how to do this. And if we're being honest, there's a lot of things that we're asked to do that we don't know much about, and yet we're expected to do.
Right.
And that kind of leads us to our introduction of our next podcast. John, give us a little hint, because I think it might be helpful with our conversation we're having now.
So in Pod 97, Jim, I want us to just talk about rethinking the role of lead pastor. Barna published a report 12 years ago that stated that the average church member expects their lead pastor to be proficient in 16 competencies. and I fear that some lead pastors expect the same out of themselves.
Yeah.
So we're gonna talk about that in Pod 97.
How to be set up to fail by your congregation. Right on. Well, John, thank you for your wisdom. I love this. It's a good conversation. And we hope that this conversation starts other conversations. We hope that the conversation about the digital, we didn't tell you what to do. We told you what we're seeing, and now you have to decide what to do. You have to decide how digital fits into the ministry that God's given you to serve and the world that God's given you to reach. So we trust that you will. We are praying for you. We love you. We do this for you, and we hope that you will join us again very soon as we continue to lead from alignment.